Walking into my cousin's wedding reception alone, I felt every pair of eyes in my family turn toward me, with that familiar mixture of pity and smugness. My aunt whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Poor Sage, still no one willing to put up with her." The table of relatives erupted in barely concealed laughter. What they didn't know was that I had spent the last 6 months uncovering the biggest fraud in our family's history, and tonight, their golden boy groom was about to fall from grace spectacularly. Before we dive into this wild ride of family betrayal and sweet justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you love stories about karma coming full circle and family secrets exploding at the worst possible moment, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this tale of revenge is about to get absolutely insane. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. It all started 3 months ago when my grandmother passed away and left her entire estate to my cousin Marcus, the golden child, who could apparently do no wrong. Everyone celebrated his inheritance of her $2 million Victorian mansion and substantial investment portfolio. Meanwhile, I received a single item, an old wooden jewelry box that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Initially, I felt hurt and overlooked, just another reminder of how I had always been the family disappointment. Unlike Marcus, who had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School and landed a prestigious job at a top investment firm, I was just Sage, the struggling freelance graphic designer who lived in a tiny apartment and drove a beat-up Honda Civic. But when I opened that jewelry box at home, everything changed. Hidden beneath the velvet lining was a collection of documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements, forged signatures, and most damning of all, a detailed journal written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting, documenting years of financial manipulation. The entries revealed a horrifying pattern of emotional manipulation and financial abuse. Marcus had been systematically draining her accounts for the past 5 years, convincing her that her memory was failing and that she had given him permission to manage her finances. He had moved money from her savings into accounts under his control, sold off valuable antiques and jewelry pieces, and even taken out loans against her property without her knowledge. The most heartbreaking entry was dated just 2 weeks before her death. "I know what Marcus has been doing, but no one will believe me. They all think I am losing my mind. I am leaving this evidence to Sage because she is the only one who ever truly listened to me, the only one who visited me because she wanted to, not because she needed something." Reading those words, I felt a mixture of rage and profound sadness. My grandmother had been crying out for help, but everyone, including myself, had dismissed her concerns as the ramblings of an elderly woman. We had all been so blinded by Marcus's charm and success that we failed to see the predator hiding beneath the perfect facade. I spent the next several weeks meticulously going through every document, cross-referencing bank statements with receipts, and building an ironclad case. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had stolen nearly $800,000 over 5 years, all while positioning himself as the devoted grandson who was simply helping his aging grandmother manage her affairs. The cruelest part was how he had isolated her from the rest of the family. He convinced everyone that her increasing distress and confusion were signs of dementia, effectively silencing her when she tried to speak up about his theft. He would arrive at family gatherings with stories about her episodes and how difficult it was becoming to care for her, painting himself as the martyred caregiver. I realized that the inheritance was not a reward for his devotion, but the final piece of his long-term plan. By convincing my grandmother to change her will in his favor, he had legitimized his theft and ensured that no one would ever question his sudden wealth. After all, it was just his inheritance, right? But Marcus had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated the woman he had spent years dismissing and overlooking. My grandmother had been far more aware than anyone realized, and she had carefully documented everything, waiting for the right person to expose the truth. As I sat surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, I felt a determination unlike anything I had ever experienced. This was not just about money or justice. This was about honoring my grandmother's memory and ensuring that her voice was finally heard. Marcus was about to learn that underestimating the family disappointment was the biggest mistake of his life. Armed with my grandmother's documentation, I began my own investigation, determined to gather enough evidence to ensure Marcus could never talk his way out of what was coming. I started by visiting my grandmother's bank, where I presented her journal and requested copies of all account statements from the past 5 years. The bank manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, was initially hesitant until I explained the situation. When she saw the evidence of potential elder abuse, her demeanor completely changed. She revealed that my grandmother had actually come to the bank several times in her final months, expressing concerns about unauthorized transactions. But Marcus had always accompanied her to subsequent visits, explaining away her worries as confusion. "Your grandmother was much sharper than your cousin led us to believe," Mrs. Rodriguez confided. "She asked very specific questions about her accounts, but whenever we suggested she speak with someone privately, Marcus would insist that she was easily overwhelmed and needed his support. We should have seen the red flags, but he was so convincing, so professional." The bank records painted a damning picture. Large withdrawals coinciding with Marcus's visits, transfers to accounts that my grandmother had never authorized, and most telling of all, signature comparisons that clearly showed forgery on multiple documents. The bank's own fraud detection software had flagged several transactions, but Marcus's status as the designated financial power of attorney had prevented any investigation. Next, I visited the antique dealers and auction houses where Marcus had sold my grandmother's belongings. Using the documentation from her jewelry box, I was able to trace the sale of several valuable pieces, including a collection of Depression-era glass that had been worth far more than Marcus had claimed. One dealer, Mr. Thompson, remembered Marcus clearly. He seemed very knowledgeable about the pieces, said his grandmother was downsizing, and wanted quick sales rather than maximum value. We offered fair market prices, but he insisted on immediate cash transactions. It struck me as odd, because these pieces could have brought much more at auction, but he said his grandmother preferred simplicity. The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus had deliberately chosen quick, cash-heavy sales that would be harder to trace, always claiming that my grandmother preferred immediate resolution over maximum profit. He had systematically liquidated her most valuable possessions while convincing the family that she was simply decluttering in her old age. But my most shocking discovery came when I contacted my grandmother's former attorney, the one who had handled her affairs before Marcus convinced her to switch to his firm's legal team. Attorney Patricia Williams had retired the year before my grandmother's death, but she agreed to meet with me after I explained the situation. "I always wondered what happened to Eleanor," she said, using my grandmother's first name with the familiarity of a long professional relationship. She had been my client for over 20 years, very sharp, very particular about her estate planning. Then suddenly Marcus arrived with a new power of attorney document and announced that she was transferring all her legal affairs to his firm. Ms. Williams pulled out a thick file that made my heart race. "Eleanor came to see me secretly about 6 months before her death. She was terrified, convinced that Marcus was stealing from her, but afraid that no one would believe her. She wanted to change her will back to its original form, leaving everything equally divided among all her grandchildren, but she was afraid Marcus would find out. The original will was everything I had hoped to find and more. Not only had my grandmother intended to divide her estate equally, but she had also left specific instructions about her concerns regarding Marcus's behavior. The document included a sealed letter detailing her fears and requesting a full financial audit if she died under suspicious circumstances. I advised her to contact the police, but she was terrified of the family backlash," Ms. Williams continued. "She said Marcus had convinced everyone that she was losing her memory, and she was afraid they would think she was just confused. She made me promise to keep this will safe and only reveal it if someone came forward with evidence of wrongdoing." I felt a chill run down my spine as the full scope of Marcus's manipulation became clear. He had not only stolen money and possessions, but had also used psychological warfare to ensure my grandmother's silence. He had systematically destroyed her credibility within the family, making it impossible for her to seek help without appearing unstable. Ms. Williams handed me a copy of the original will, along with my grandmother's sealed letter. Eleanor was convinced that if something happened to her, you would be the one to uncover the truth. She said you were the only one who really saw her, who visited without wanting anything in return. She trusted you to clear her name. Reading my grandmother's letter was one of the most painful and empowering moments of my life. In her careful handwriting, she had documented not just the financial abuse, but the emotional toll of being gaslighted by someone she had loved and trusted. She had felt trapped, isolated, and desperate, but she had never stopped fighting for justice, even when she knew she might not live to see it. The letter ended with words that would drive me forward through everything that was about to come. If you are reading this, my dear sage, it means that the truth has finally begun to surface. Do not let them silence me in death as they did in life. Make them hear my voice. As I left Ms. Williams's office with copies of everything, I realized that I now had enough evidence not just for a civil case, but potentially for criminal charges. Marcus had committed elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft on a massive scale. The perfect golden boy was about to become a convicted felon, and his wedding day was going to be the perfect stage for his downfall. With my evidence organized and my strategy taking shape, I knew I could not take down Marcus alone. His reputation and connections meant that any accusation from me would likely be dismissed as jealousy from the unsuccessful cousin. I needed allies, people whose voices could not be ignored or discredited. My first call was to my Uncle David, my grandmother's youngest son, and Marcus's father. This conversation was going to be the hardest because I was essentially telling him that his golden child was a criminal who had abused his own mother. I prepared myself for denial, anger, and possibly complete rejection of the evidence. I invited Uncle David to coffee, telling him I had found some of grandmother's papers that he should see. When I laid out the documentation, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a devastating recognition. I knew something was wrong, he said quietly, his voice breaking. She kept trying to tell us that things were missing, that she had not authorized certain transactions, but Marcus always had explanations. He would show us medical articles about dementia, convince us that her accusations were symptoms of her declining mental state. Uncle David revealed something that made my blood boil even more. Marcus actually suggested that we consider putting her in a memory care facility about a year before she died. He said she was becoming paranoid, and that living alone was no longer safe. We almost did it, Sage. We almost took away the last bit of independence she had left. The realization that Marcus had been planning to institutionalize our grandmother to prevent her from exposing his crimes added another layer of evil to his actions. He had been willing to rob her of her freedom, her dignity, and her final years of happiness to cover up his theft. But Uncle David surprised me with his next words. I want to help you expose this. Your grandmother deserved better from all of us, but especially from her own grandson. Tell me what you need. My next ally came from an unexpected source. While researching Marcus's professional background, I discovered that his prestigious investment firm had been under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for several unrelated violations. I reached out to the lead investigator, Agent Sarah Martinez, and shared what I had discovered. Agent Martinez was immediately interested, not just because of the elder abuse angle, but because Marcus's pattern of financial manipulation matched several cases they were already investigating. We have been looking at his firm for months, she explained during our meeting at a downtown coffee shop. Several clients have reported missing funds and unauthorized transactions, but they have all been wealthy individuals whose cases could be explained away as misunderstandings or legitimate investment losses. She leaned forward, her eyes intense with professional interest. Your grandmother's case is different because you have documentation of the entire pattern from start to finish. This could be the key to unraveling a much larger fraud operation. Agent Martinez explained that if we could prove Marcus had been stealing from his own family, it would give them probable cause to investigate his professional activities more thoroughly. The personal case could be the thread that pulled apart his entire criminal enterprise. My third ally was someone I had never expected to trust, Marcus's own fiancée, Jessica. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made the difficult decision to approach her directly. I knew she might warn Marcus, but I felt she deserved to know who she was about to marry. I asked Jessica to meet me for lunch, telling her I had concerns about the family dynamics and wanted to discuss them before the wedding. She agreed, probably thinking I was going to air some minor family grievance or ask for relationship advice. When I showed her the evidence, Jessica's reaction was immediate and visceral. She pushed back from the table, her face pale with shock. "This cannot be true," she whispered. "Marcus told me your grandmother had dementia, that she was confused about her finances. He said the family was grateful he had stepped in to help her." I watched as the pieces fell into place in her mind. "The house," she said suddenly. "He told me his grandmother wanted him to have the house because he was the only one who visited her regularly. But you were there too, were you not? You mentioned visiting her at family dinners." Jessica began to recall inconsistencies in Marcus's stories, moments when his explanations had not quite added up, but which she had dismissed because she trusted him. "He was always so generous with money, always picking up expensive dinner bills, buying me jewelry. I thought he was just successful at work, but—" The horror in her eyes was painful to watch, but I needed her to understand the full scope of what Marcus had done. "Jessica, I am not telling you this to hurt you. I am telling you because you deserve to know the truth before you legally bind yourself to someone capable of this level of deception." She sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything I had shared. Finally, she looked up with tears in her eyes. "What do you need me to do?" Jessica's willingness to help was both surprising and essential. As Marcus's fiancée, she had access to information and opportunities that no one else could provide. More importantly, her betrayal would be the one thing Marcus would never see coming. Over the next week, Jessica carefully gathered additional evidence from Marcus's personal files, including bank statements that showed his recent expensive purchases and lifestyle upgrades that far exceeded his legitimate salary. She also discovered communications with the auction houses and dealers confirming the timeline of when he had sold my grandmother's belongings. The final piece of my alliance came together when Uncle David arranged a meeting with my grandmother's pastor, Reverend Thompson, who had been concerned about her final months, but had been told by Marcus that her distress was due to her failing health. When shown the evidence, Reverend Thompson revealed that my grandmother had confessed her fears to him, but had made him promise not to interfere because she was afraid it would make things worse for the family. "She was carrying such a burden of pain and fear," Reverend Thompson said. "She felt trapped between protecting her family from scandal and protecting herself from abuse. She prayed for wisdom and strength, and I believe she found both in her decision to document everything for you." With my alliance in place, Uncle David providing family credibility, Agent Martinez handling the legal and criminal aspects, Jessica supplying insider information, and Reverend Thompson serving as a moral witness, I was ready for the next phase of my plan. The wedding reception was just 3 days away, and Marcus had no idea that his perfect day was about to become the stage for the most spectacular downfall our family had ever witnessed. Everything was in place for the moment when the golden boy would finally face the consequences of his actions, and my grandmother's voice would finally be heard. The wedding reception was in full swing when I received the text message that shattered my world. It was from Jessica. "I am sorry, Sage. I cannot do this to him. I told Marcus everything. You need to leave now." My heart stopped as I read the message again, hoping I had misunderstood. But there was no ambiguity in her words. Jessica had betrayed our alliance and warned Marcus about everything we had planned. All those weeks of careful preparation, all the evidence we had gathered, all the trust I had placed in her, gone in an instant. I looked around the reception hall with new eyes, suddenly aware that I was now the prey instead of the hunter. Marcus was across the room chatting with relatives, but I could see the difference in his posture now that I knew he was aware of my plans. He kept glancing in my direction with a smile that no longer seemed charming, but predatory. My phone buzzed with another message, this time from Uncle David. Marcus just called me. He says you have been spreading lies about him and that he has proof you forged documents to frame him. The family is asking you to leave quietly to avoid a scene. The speed at which Marcus had turned the situation around was breathtaking. In the span of a few hours, he had gone from unknowing target to orchestrating my public humiliation. I realized that Jessica's betrayal was not just personal, it was strategic. Marcus had likely convinced her that I was the unstable one, that my accusations were the product of jealousy and mental instability. I tried calling Agent Martinez, but her phone went straight to voicemail. When I attempted to reach Uncle David, he declined my call and sent a text. I trusted you with sensitive family information, and you used it to create an elaborate lie. Marcus showed me evidence that you manipulated those bank documents. I am disappointed in you, Sage. The isolation was swift and complete. Within hours, Marcus had not only neutralized my evidence, but had also turned my own allies against me. I began to understand how my grandmother must have felt, surrounded by people who refused to believe the truth because the lie was more comfortable. Marcus approached me as I stood alone near the back of the reception hall, his wedding smile never faltering. Sage, I heard you have been going through a difficult time lately. Jessica was worried about some concerning behavior she witnessed when you two met for lunch. She said you seemed paranoid, making wild accusations about family members. His voice was loud enough for nearby relatives to hear, and I could feel their eyes on me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. This was exactly what he had done to our grandmother, publicly undermining her credibility while appearing concerned and caring. I know you have been struggling since grandmother passed. Marcus continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy. Grief can make people do irrational things, create conspiracy theories to explain their pain. But accusing family members of serious crimes, that crosses a line, Sage. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages. Jessica forwarded me your messages to her. The paranoia, the elaborate theories, the way you tried to manipulate her into helping you frame me. She was frightened by your behavior, Sage. We all are. I realized that Marcus had not just prepared a defense, he had prepared a counterattack designed to destroy my credibility permanently. The text messages he was showing me were real, but they were taken out of context, edited to make me appear unhinged, rather than determined to expose the truth. I have also spoken with Dr. Richards about your condition, Marcus said, referring to a family friend who was a psychiatrist. He agrees that you are exhibiting signs of a serious mental health crisis. We think you need professional help, Sage. The trap was perfect and terrifying. Marcus had used my own evidence gathering against me, twisting my methodical investigation into proof of obsessive behavior. He had turned my passion for justice into evidence of instability. Every document I had collected, every conversation I had recorded, every ally I had recruited, all of it had been reframed as the delusions of a grieving woman who could not accept reality. As I looked around the reception, I saw that the entire family was now viewing me as the problem. Aunts and uncles who had known me my entire life were whispering and pointing, their expressions filled with concern and embarrassment. Cousins who had grown up with me were keeping their distance as if my supposed mental illness might be contagious. The cruelest part was seeing Uncle David avoid my gaze completely. Marcus had somehow convinced him that the documents I had shown him were forgeries, that my grandmother's journal was fabricated, that everything I had shared was the product of a delusional mind seeking attention and sympathy. I felt the walls closing in as Marcus continued his public humiliation. We have arranged for you to speak with Dr. Richards tomorrow morning. This family loves you, Sage, but we cannot enable destructive behavior. Making false accusations against family members is not something we can ignore. The beautiful irony was not lost on me. I was experiencing exactly what my grandmother had endured, but in fast forward. The isolation, the gaslighting, the systematic destruction of credibility, the way concerned family members became unwitting accomplices in the abuse. Marcus had perfected his technique on our grandmother, and now he was using it to destroy me. As I stood there, surrounded by family members who no longer trusted me, I felt a crushing sense of defeat. All my careful planning, all my righteous anger, all my determination to honor my grandmother's memory, none of it mattered if no one would believe the truth. Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "You should have minded your own business, cousin. Now everyone will remember you as the crazy girl who tried to destroy a grieving man's reputation with lies. Your grandmother would be ashamed." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were true, but because I realized that Marcus was probably right about how this story would be remembered. He had successfully flipped the narrative, turning himself into the victim and me into the villain. My grandmother's truth would die with my credibility, and Marcus would walk away, not just wealthy, but also viewed as the long-suffering family member who had tried to help his disturbed cousin. As the reception continued around me, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The golden boy had won again, and justice felt further away than ever. But somewhere in the depths of my despair, a small voice reminded me of my grandmother's words: "Do not let them silence me in death as they did in life." I was sitting in my car in the hotel parking lot trying to process the complete destruction of everything I had worked for when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. "Is this Sage?" "My name is Detective Rebecca Walsh with the Elder Abuse Unit. I believe we need to talk." My heart stopped. "How did you get this number?" "Your grandmother filed a police report 6 months before her death. She came to our station terrified and shaking with a folder full of documents. She said her grandson was stealing from her, but she was afraid no one would believe her because he had convinced everyone she had dementia." I felt the world shift around me as Detective Walsh continued. "We advised her to gather more evidence and return with a family member who could corroborate her story. She never came back, and when she died, we assumed the case had resolved itself naturally. But then Agent Martinez contacted us about your investigation, and we realized we had been sitting on crucial evidence this entire time." Detective Walsh arranged to meet me immediately at a 24-hour diner near the hotel. When I arrived, she was waiting with a thick manila folder and a laptop computer. "Your grandmother was much more thorough than even you realized," she said without preamble. She opened the laptop and showed me security camera footage from my grandmother's bank. She gave us permission to access these recordings when she filed her report. Watch this. The timestamp showed a date from 18 months before my grandmother's death. In the grainy footage, I could see my grandmother at the bank counter, clearly distressed, pointing to documents and speaking animatedly with a teller. Then Marcus entered the frame, approaching from behind with that familiar, charming smile. "Watch his body language," Detective Walsh instructed. "See how he immediately positions himself between your grandmother and the teller. How he places his hand on her shoulder in what appears to be a comforting gesture, but actually prevents her from moving closer to the counter." I watched in horror as Marcus smoothly took control of the conversation. Even without audio, his manipulation was visible. He gestured dismissively when my grandmother tried to speak, showed documents to the teller while blocking my grandmother's view, and gradually maneuvered her away from the counter while maintaining that caring grandson facade. "We have similar footage from 4 other visits," Detective Walsh continued. "Each time your grandmother arrives alone and appears upset, and each time Marcus arrives within minutes to assist her. It is textbook elder abuse, isolating the victim, controlling their communication, and gaslighting them about their own perceptions." But the detective's most devastating revelation was yet to come. Your grandmother also wore a recording device during her final confrontation with Marcus. She was terrified, but she was determined to get proof of his abuse. What you are about to hear is difficult, but it is legally admissible evidence. The recording was crystal clear, capturing a conversation between my grandmother and Marcus in her living room just weeks before her death. His voice, usually so smooth and charming, was cold and threatening when he thought no one could hear. "You are not going to tell anyone about the money, grandmother. Do you understand me? If you try to cause problems, I will have you declared incompetent and put in a state facility. No one will believe a crazy old woman over a Harvard graduate with a spotless reputation." My grandmother's voice was shaky but determined. "I know what you have done, Marcus. I have been keeping records. The bank statements, the forged signatures, all of it. I may be old, but I am not stupid." Marcus's laugh on the recording was chilling. "Those records? You mean the confused scribblings of a woman with dementia who is going to believe that, over my word, I have spent 5 years convincing this entire family that you are losing your mind, and they all believe it, including your precious sage." The recording continued with Marcus detailing exactly how he had manipulated the family's perception of my grandmother, how he had planted seeds of doubt about her mental capacity, and how he had systematically isolated her from anyone who might have believed her story. "The beautiful thing about gaslighting an old woman," Marcus's voice continued on the recording, "is that everyone expects them to be confused and forgetful. All I had to do was suggest that grandmother was having episodes, and suddenly every legitimate complaint became a symptom of dementia." Detective Walsh paused the recording. "There is more, but I think you get the picture. Your grandmother was collecting evidence for months before her death. She knew she might not live to see justice, but she was determined to create a record that could not be dismissed or explained away." I was shaking as the full scope of the evidence became clear. "Why did you not arrest him immediately after she died?" "We tried to contact the family about reopening the investigation, but Marcus intercepted our calls. He told us the family was grieving and did not want to pursue any legal action. He provided us with documentation from her doctor suggesting that her allegations were related to her declining mental state. We had no choice but to close the case pending new evidence." Detective Walsh leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But now we have new evidence. Your investigation combined with your grandmother's original report and recordings gives us everything we need for criminal charges. Not just theft and elder abuse, but conspiracy, fraud, and falsification of documents." She pulled out another folder. "Agent Martinez shared your evidence with our department this morning before Marcus had a chance to discredit you. We have been building a case all day while he was celebrating his wedding and destroying your reputation." I realized that while I had been suffering through my public humiliation at the reception, law enforcement had been working to ensure that my grandmother's voice would finally be heard. The timing was perfect. Marcus's confidence in his victory had made him careless, and his wedding day celebration would soon become his arrest day nightmare. "There is one more thing," Detective Walsh said, pulling out a sealed envelope. "Your grandmother left this letter specifically for you to be opened only if criminal charges were filed against Marcus. She wanted you to know that she never doubted you would be the one to bring her justice." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and read my grandmother's final message to me. "My dearest Sage, if you are reading this, it means that the truth has finally surfaced and Marcus is facing the consequences of his actions. I knew it would be you who refused to let them silence me. You were always the one who really saw me, who listened when others dismissed my concerns. Thank you for being my voice when I could no longer speak. Now go live your life knowing that justice has been served and that love always triumphs over greed." As I finished reading, Detective Walsh stood up. "We are executing arrest warrants tonight. Marcus will be taken into custody at his hotel, and we will be searching his home and office for additional evidence. Would you like to be there when we arrest him?" For the first time in hours, I smiled. My grandmother's plan had been far more sophisticated than I had ever imagined. She had not just documented the abuse, she had created a legal trap that would be impossible for Marcus to escape. The golden boy's perfect life was about to come crashing down, and this time there would be no charming his way out of the consequences. The arrest happened at 3 in the morning at Marcus's honeymoon suite. Detective Walsh allowed me to watch from the parking lot as they led him out in handcuffs, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, his perfect hair disheveled, and his charming smile replaced by shock and rage. Jessica stood in the hotel doorway crying but not trying to stop the arrest. Later, I learned that Detective Walsh had played Marcus's recorded confession for her, the one where he detailed exactly how he had manipulated our entire family. Hearing his cold, calculating voice describing his abuse of our grandmother had shattered any remaining loyalty she felt toward him. The news of Marcus's arrest spread through our family like wildfire. By sunrise, my phone was buzzing with calls and texts from relatives who had dismissed me just hours earlier at the reception. Uncle David was the first to call, his voice broken with shame and remorse. "Sage, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. The police showed me the evidence, the recordings, everything. I cannot believe I let him convince me that you were lying. I failed you and I failed my mother." One by one, family members called to apologize, each conversation revealing how thoroughly Marcus had manipulated all of us. Aunts admitted that they had always felt something was wrong, but had trusted Marcus's explanations about grandmother's condition. Cousins confessed that they had noticed expensive purchases Marcus could not afford, but had accepted his stories about bonuses and investments. The most painful call came from Reverend Thompson, who wept as he told me about my grandmother's final confession to him. She knew she was dying, and she was terrified that Marcus would never face consequences for what he had done to her. She made me promise to support whoever tried to expose the truth, even if the family turned against them. "I should have spoken up for you at the reception, Sage. I failed her, and I failed you." But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later when the local newspaper ran a front-page story about Marcus's arrest. The headline read, "Investment Advisor Arrested for Elder Abuse and Fraud." The article detailed not just his theft from our grandmother, but also the federal investigation into his professional activities that had been triggered by our case. Agent Martinez called to inform me that Marcus's arrest had led to the discovery of a much larger fraud scheme involving dozens of elderly clients. "Your grandmother's case was the key that unlocked everything," she explained. His pattern of manipulation and theft was not limited to family members. "We have identified at least 30 other victims, and the total theft amount is over $4 million." The criminal trial became a media sensation, with my grandmother's recordings playing a central role in the prosecution's case. Hearing her voice in that courtroom finally being believed and taken seriously felt like the vindication she had deserved in life but never received. Marcus's defense team tried to claim that the recordings were taken out of context, that his threats were just the frustrated words of a caring grandson dealing with a mentally ill relative. But the financial evidence was overwhelming, and the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Marcus to 15 years in federal prison, with an additional requirement to pay full restitution to all his victims. His assets were seized, including the inheritance he had stolen from my grandmother, which was redistributed according to her original will. Jessica filed for divorce before the trial even began, and she surprised me by asking to meet for coffee after the sentencing. "I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did," she said, her eyes still showing the trauma of learning who she had almost married. "Marcus fooled all of us, but you were the only one brave enough to fight back. Your grandmother would be proud." The aftermath of Marcus's conviction brought unexpected healing to our family. Uncle David used his portion of the redistributed inheritance to establish a foundation for elder abuse prevention in my grandmother's name. Other family members began sharing their own stories of how Marcus had manipulated them over the years, creating a collective understanding of how predators operate within families. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the relationship I developed with my grandmother's former neighbors and friends, people who had witnessed her isolation and distress, but had felt powerless to help. They shared stories of the woman I had known and loved, confirming that her mind had been sharp until the end, and that her fears had been completely justified. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door, told me that my grandmother had often spoken about me in her final months. She said you were the only one who visited her because you wanted to, not because you needed something. She believed that if anyone could expose Marcus's lies, it would be you. She was right. Today, 5 years after Marcus's conviction, I have built a career as a victim advocate specializing in elder abuse cases. I use my experience and my grandmother's story to help other families recognize the signs of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. The work is difficult but rewarding, knowing that each case I help solve honors my grandmother's memory. The jewelry box that started this entire journey sits on my desk as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful gifts come in unexpected packages. My grandmother could not give me wealth or status, but she gave me something far more valuable: the truth and the courage to fight for justice, even when the entire world seems against you. I have learned that chosen family, the people who stand by you when blood relatives fail you, is often stronger than biological bonds. Detective Walsh has become a mentor and friend. Agent Martinez and I still work together on elder abuse cases. Even Jessica, despite everything she went through, has become an ally in spreading awareness about financial manipulation. Our family gatherings are different now, smaller but more honest. We talk openly about the damage that secrets and favoritism can cause, and we have all committed to listening more carefully when someone voices concerns about abuse or mistreatment. Marcus will be eligible for parole in 8 more years, but the financial industry has blacklisted him permanently. His reputation is destroyed, his marriage is over, and his victims have found justice. Most importantly, my grandmother's voice was finally heard, and her story has prevented countless other families from experiencing similar betrayals. Looking back on that terrible night at the wedding reception, when I thought I had lost everything, I realize it was actually the moment when I found my true calling. Fighting for justice is never easy, and the people who need it most are often the ones whose voices have been silenced by those they trusted. But if my story proves anything, it is that the truth always finds a way to surface, and karma has a way of coming for those who prey on the vulnerable. Sometimes justice takes time, sometimes it requires sacrifice, and sometimes you have to stand alone against an entire family to make it happen. But it is always worth the fight. So I want to ask you something that connects to everything we have experienced together through this story. Have you ever suspected that someone in your family was being manipulated or abused, but stayed quiet because you were afraid no one would believe you? Have you ever witnessed injustice, but felt powerless to act because the perpetrator seemed too charming, too successful, too protected by their reputation? These are the moments that define us, and I believe that each of us has the power to be someone's voice when they cannot speak for themselves. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own experiences with family secrets and hidden truths, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you are watching from and whether you have ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what is right. Subscribe for more stories about justice prevailing over deception, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their voice matters even when the world tries to silence them. Thank you for joining me on this journey of uncovering family secrets and fighting for what is right. And remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stay silent when you witness wrongdoing. The truth may be uncomfortable, but it is always worth fighting for, and there is always someone brave enough to stand up for justice when it matters most.